Welcome, peak performance professionals. Welcome, budding sales professionals looking to be a real estate rock and roller. And in today's show, we're going to be talking about this session, of course, is around momentum. So we're assuming that you've built market share, you're looking to get momentum and retention of business. You may not be there yet, you might be aspiring to. Either way, this is session M309. And today we're going to talk about presenting a listing education. And now, I know that sounds a little bit over the top. And I've said, do you want to be a real estate rock and roller educator? And to me, I think the mistake that was made when we look at the listing presentation is that we have focused on just that word, presentation. The problem with the presentation, it just invokes the idea of showing somebody something. And the thing that I don't like about that, even if we step back into the sales trainer level when we talk about the ultimate listing presentation, and I've always said that you need to engage the client. You need to be asking rhetorical questions you know the answer to. And this has a tendency to lead them to the conclusion that you wanted to. I want to take that one step further when we talk at the real estate rockstar level and explain that it's about educating more than it is about presenting. And, it was one of these things that we talked about this week, and I'll just go through this round the traps and then get into the essence of what it takes to move from the role of just merely presenting something to someone and running or looking to solicit business, and rather actually getting sellers to invite you to take control of their situation because their confidence is such that they can see that you are definitely competent and you know what you're about. So just around the traps before we start, with Prospector and Prospector 4 and prospecting, all the way back to the PC3M level, prospectors, prospector school. And a lot of you real estate rock stars have an assistant, a blue assistant in tow. I know that we're here today, we've got Nick Saparovich, and of course, Hannah Saparovich is obviously the blue sales associate, if you like, and the primary job of prospecting and getting to that eventual goal of prospect flow and keeping that continuity in play. And of course, last week we spoke about the red, blue, black, and of course green. And Liz Smyers on here also works with Nick Saparovich, and of course she's mainly focused in the admin support style role, which still pertains, I always call it light blue, because it still pertains to keeping those sellers rolling through. And we've had some fantastic success with that. Now, in the PC3M program, which those of you that haven't already, make sure that if you've got a sales assistant in tow, that you're getting them across to PC3M on a Thursday. So that's 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. The theme that we've followed for the last couple of weeks is keeping the connection and keeping the communication up with active property sellers, but steering away from this notion of pushing too hard to get down there to do the listing presentation, which sometimes we refer to as market appraisals. As you know, with me, that's another big no-no. But basically on the premise of giving them an indication or an idea on price, which I believe is subjective. There's more on that later as we talk about the Property Sellers Research Guide. And of course, giving sellers an education. But, we've really pushed the thrust behind prospecting right now to be more about winning the listing presentation, and obviously then eventually the listing, by invitation rather than solicitation. I think that when we look at the prospecting method, we get way too zealous about getting down to the property almost straight away once we've identified a seller. So just to rehash on that, and what we've said is steer away from this qualifying them too harshly and then pushing for the presentation, or in fact, the market appraisal, it then becomes about price, and motive comes as basically an afterthought. We've flipped that on its head, and the framework that we're looking for now is qualification, then immediately moving to identification of the motive. Now, remember, searching a motive it's about searching for the motive, not interrogating for the motive. But once you get hold of that motive, then looking for opportunities to offer advice rather than moving into that subjective area of price. So again, we say it's fundamentally around invitation, focusing on getting the invitation rather than solicitation. We're having extraordinary success. I know that Justin Hicks, who's basically one of our sales team leaders and still tunes in on the Real Estate Rockstar. He might tune into this even now. I haven't had a check, but they're getting their listing presentations up. I know that Lincoln Tatnall and Courtney Fern, which we mentioned last week, they've had a goal of a listing presentation every day, and so far have been on song. I'm catching up with them tomorrow rather than the usual Tuesday to discuss that. So everything's headed in the right direction there. Then we move into Sales Trainer Mentor. Fabulous news on this one, in that we are now seeing a number of real estate rock stars and also real estate salespeople really wanting to embrace the concept of moving away from just focusing on a presentation that's really about giving a price, and then maybe finding themselves into that awful disposition of having to compete with other agents to win the listing, basically upon the price they quote and the fee they charge. And look, I've seen some enormous success with that. I know that Sean Donovan's on here from Hill and Vatiri, and he's embracing the whole idea of winning listings without really having to get too heavily into subjective arguments about comparative value versus what eventually will be market value, and figuring out how to win the listing, not fundamentally on fee, but winning it based on your competence in certain areas. And we're going to give some rise to that. So coincidentally, if you're interested as a real estate rockstar, this Friday and every Friday thereafter might be a bit too early for some of you. I know it'd be too early for people that are over in the West, in Western Australia. But I have presenting to the McDowell team over there in the Bay of Plenty. So a couple of offices that got down there, about 30 odd salespeople, and we're going to be running through the listing presentation and training from beginning to end for about 13 or 14 weeks. You are welcome if you are a Real Estate Rockstar subscriber, or even if you're a Sales Trainer Mentor subscriber, to join us. Only problem is, for me, I got to get out of bed at 6:30 in the morning and present at 7, because for them it'll be 9 o'clock in or NZ time, which of course means on the east coast of Australia that will be a 7 o'clock start to roughly about 8:30, and then of course if you are in Perth, that would mean getting up at 5 a.m. If you do register, I'm more than happy to send you the recordings of that if you'd like to see them and you want to participate. But again, that's mainly following the theme which I'm going to share with you now about presenting a listing education. We're still building all of this stuff in and through Real Estate Rockstar. Most of you Real Estate Rockstars right now are focusing on a best month ever. As we've said over and over again, there aren't many problems inside a real estate business that can't be solved with a quick 10 sales. This, of course, means a quick 10 listings. And if right now you are putting all of your energy into prospecting, identifying, as I just spoke about a minute ago, and moving through onto the motive, and then getting good advice out to sellers and following up with the passive contact. And one of the first cabs off the rank with the passive contact is what we call the Property Sellers Research Guide. If you don't have that on board, I cannot begin to tell you how important that document is in framing yourself up in and around becoming a listing educator. I said this many, many times. You go to a listing presentation and I say, what's the framework? What's the agenda that's generally followed at a listing presentation? And so often I hear that agents start, some of them, which is, I think, is almost suicide, start the presentation with saying, or they treat it like a job interview and say, what's important for you and an agent? I think that's probably the most absurd thing that you can do, in that, you're actually affording control back to the seller, and they've got you down because they don't really know what to do. Now you're asking them what they want you to do, and they're not even sure. I just think that's almost straight away screams incompetence, and you want to stay away from that particular flow in and around things. So, I find the typical listing agenda is basically real estate agents are going in, they're jumping onto price, they're jumping into the CMA. Now they're hoping like hell that they can guess how many marbles the client's got in the jar. In other words, what price they're thinking. And if you guess that, well, then you're kind of okay. Of course, you run the risk if you overly inflate it. Some sellers who consider themselves to be savvy in this area go, oh, look, we don't want to rip anyone off. And, these guys, we know, we can tell they're just overpricing it or whatever. But invariably, it's the most optimistic price that's then coupled with the most economical fee. And this is how a lot of sellers are choosing an agent. Now, I know there's a third wheel in there, and that's, of course, whether they like you or they've got a personal relationship with you. But if somebody is undercutting you or discounting by half to maybe a full 1%, it's kind of difficult for people to like you by that much. And I'm sure you can understand it, especially if you allow them to stay in the space of fully believing that all agents are going to achieve the same price, all agents are going to get the same result. So therefore, why wouldn't they go for the more economical fee? Or why wouldn't they then consider an agent that perhaps is offering them a better disposition around the investment in marketing or otherwise? And of course, there's that other side of the coin. And I've played ball to it in some respects, but the reality is this whole notion of off-market listings, let's be honest, is founded around people wanting to save money or not having to invest in the marketing expense, which I think on balance is an absurdity. And it's because real estate agents are failing to explain the difference between marketing and advertising. I readily concede that you don't need to advertise a property to find buyers for it. I've always held the view that, if you've got a good listing, you could take a photograph of it, you could stick that photograph on the inside of your office window with a piece of chewing gum, and buyers will still come. The jury will always be out as to whether, when you find that buyer, if their perception of that property is not at its optimum level, whether they will part with as much money as they might have if their perception was indeed optimized. So marketing is actually the message. Marketing is the perception. And if that perception is carried through to its best level, this has to translate to more money. It has to translate to an easier transaction all round. It has to translate to a more cooperative seller and a more cooperative buyer. Now, I want to talk to you about how you move into the space of education. And that is, and the first rule of thumb around this is to not get frustrated, but instead get fascinated, to draw a deep breath. And here's the line that I always use inside my own mind when I feel like a seller's starting to cut me off and move into that space of assuming that all agents are the same. I just inside my head say, hang on a sec. These people don't know what they don't know yet. And it falls to me to invest maybe as little as 3 minutes to sometimes as much as 15 minutes in educating them around the facet they don't understand. And look, a large part of this is achieved by embracing the property seller's research guide. If you don't have this document, you need to get one like it. We can manufacture this for you. Yes, there is an investment associated with that, but I believe if you embrace this fully, if you spend time to totally comprehend the difference between market value as opposed to comparative value, and you become very proficient in its explanation, you will be in a disposition where you are basically no longer competing with other agents. You will find that instead they now have to compete with you, because it is fair to say that agents, from this perspective of the sellers, do appear to be all the same. And this is basically because we're all competing with each other around the same premise. If you play, or if you choose to play the same game as your competitors, then they are able to compete with you. And when most avenues are exhausted, then invariably the discounter will go to fee. The discounter will go to creating concessions around marketing. And you need to avoid this. How do you avoid this? By educating them as to the nuances of consignment selling, as to the contrast between comparative value and market value, and how it is that market value is enhanced on an almost piecemeal fashion. Now, for the first time here, and I will explain it for those of you that are listening to this on audio, I'm just going to go through visually an example of what is contained in the document, which we refer to as the Property Seller's Research Guide. Now, you'll see this up here on your screen in front of you. And one of the first things we focus on with the Property Seller's Research Guide, is we focus up here. What's the property worth? Now, you need to understand this. You need to put this into a document that's readily available to your sellers. I think there's wonderful merits for the electronic format, in that we can put some links in there, one not least of which is you can see this one that sits right down here now. I'm not going to click on that, but one where they're able to get from you a free comparative market value report, which that of course is a CMA. But if you give rise to the explanation here, and I've got to tell you, as with all marketing documents that we put up there, they are about 90% visual. If you look at these pages, 90% of the coverage there is that of a visual image and colors, and about 10% is reserved for text, because I've always understood that people don't read. I bold the point that I'm trying to make. I'm not that concerned if they don't read it. I like the fact that they might just glean through it, but this can then set up the premise by which I'm given a voice and they're prepared to listen to me. But if you're going to put a document out like this, don't just sit there and say, well, can I have it because of the magic that it does? You need to understand what magic it yields, or wields, I should say, and then you need to be able to thoroughly explain how it works. So let's have a look at this. What's my property worth? Well, there are two ways of looking at the value of your property. The first is comparable value, is the estimated worth of a property when compared with others recently sold in similar location, accommodation, and to some degree, presentation. And here's the point. This is merely a subjective opinion, and it ignores the value variables that can enhance the value of your property, or can also ignore the value of variables that can detract the value of your property, some of which you have no control over. Certainly, we look at this as a starting point. We'd be happy to share this with you. So then we just say, there you go. To order your free comparative market value, click on that. It then sent you an email in the electronic format. Of course, you would have a different way that this would be presented in the hard copy that you would hopefully be utilizing at something like your Welcome Homes, where you can actually then qualify those that are selling. You say, we've got a Property Seller's Research Guide if you are considering selling, and they can pull that up. But that's to be explained on another day. But it is important to remember that to a home buyer, no two properties are exactly the same. And this is a point that I'm constantly pushing across and educating to a seller. When we look at comparative value, it's purely subjective. Your opinion is going to differ from my opinion, which of course is going to differ from each of the buyers. And you'll find that each of the buyers will have a different opinion. The important thing for you as a seller to remember that to any buyer, no two properties are the same. So we're always looking for the right seller, right buyer, I should say. We're always looking for the perfect buyer that sees the optimum value in the property. What will my property sell for? Well, market value is what a property actually sells for. Now, this is not understood. And this can be above or below the comparative estimation. So often I'm saying this to a seller. I say, look, the reality is when you hear an agent say they got $100,000 above market value, that's a misnomer. That's nonsense, because the price they just achieved is market value. And market value is going to differ from comparative value. Comparative value is merely a guide. It's a subjective opinion. And given that's not what you're going to receive, why are we getting hung up on that? What we've got to do is figure out how we make it worth its maximum, how we enhance the property perception-wise so that it is out there. And then when the buyer comes, their perception is optimized, which means they see the value. Because the reality is that market value can only ever be determined by taking the property to market. Yes, as you're probably no doubt seeing, this is all good fodder. This is all good dialogue that you can use at the listing presentation. Notwithstanding, this is a document that can be out there and you can be giving to sellers, setting up the platform before you arrive as a listing educator, which supersedes the entire idea of a listing presenter. Now, of course, the reality is that you are going to be a great presenter, but I believe it's because you're doing it in the context of education. On the next page, we look at those valuable variables. What are they? There are many factors that affect the value of property both positively and negatively, some of which are beyond yours or my control, Mr. Seller. Some of which are beyond control. Example of uncontrollable variables are the current supply and demand for property generally. You can't control that. We can't control that with any significant length. Regulated lending rates. So of course, fiscal policy is a valuable variable that is beyond the scope of your control, and it's an imposition. And what other property sellers might consider selling for. So if you're up against competing property and those owners of those properties are considering a much lower value, that can adversely affect your value and it's beyond your control. Similarly, if they're pushing higher, that can lift the value of your property. What can influence value positively, and it's not only within our control, but where the skill of a professional agent comes to bear, is enhanced perception of the property via imaginative marketing, along with an upward implied value established by professional negotiation. Yes, it is so true. What an agent does and says when a buyer is found can positively or sadly, in some cases, adversely affect the value of your property. And of course, skilled communication also contributes to value. We leverage value through marketing, negotiation, and communication. They're the valuable variables, and what you need to do is educate sellers as to how they work. So then, of course, it moves to who should sell your property. Of course, we believe in what an engaged professional brings to the table. However, and let's be open about this, we understand you have options. You could sell the property yourself, taking all the marketing, advertising, legals, buyer inquiry, negotiation, and so on. And here's the admission. I concede this openly. Attracting a buyer is the relatively easy part. Understanding that there is a hidden cost, risk, you may undersell without knowing it. Securing the premium buyer under the best terms and conditions, well, that's not easy. You see, so many sellers don't realize this. Finding a buyer is the easy part. Maximizing their perception of value and subsequently negotiating with them, well, that ain't easy. And that's where a professional comes to bear. And this is where we start to make the point about earning the fee rather than charging it. If you do go down this route, so we say, if you decide to sell the property yourself, feel free to call us and we'll give you some free advice. There's that premise where we're talking about where we are not focused on price, we're looking at giving advice. And we give freely, even in the event that we may not win the listing. This is the position or the disposition you must take, especially if you want to be a real estate rock star and move into the space of being that consummate professional. We're honestly happy to give you some tips. And our success and the success of your sale is built upon these three pillars. Marketing is more than taking pics and putting them on the web. That is true. It's about creating a perception. It's about understanding the buyers and the competition, your property and the wider market. Only when we've created the perception do we begin to advertise. And it's here that you can make that contrast between advertising. Advertising is merely getting the message out. Yeah, marketing is the message, is what is contained inside the conduit that is the ad. It is what creates the perception. Negotiation. Honestly, property being undersold upsets us. So often I see this, and it can be something so little. It might be 4, 5, 10,000. That 10,000 that could have been put in the owner's pocket, the buyer still would have been over the moon with their purchase, and everybody gets on swimmingly. And there's no angst, there's no suspicion that an agent is overcharging. We take it personally when we see a listing that we know, had we listed it, we could have achieved more. But we see it happen all the time. Negotiation skills are something we train rigorously on and we take very seriously. We're legally obliged to present the offers to you, but we're professionally obligated to share some of those offers up after doing so and negotiating hard on your behalf to increase them. And increase them we do. Many agents will tell you they're good negotiators, but we can prove it. Ask us and we'll show you. And then we move to communication. It is key to our relationship. You'll have complete confidence in your decisions through understanding the market as well as we do. This sets up the premise for what we explain in the listing preamble when we tell them that our job is to transfer relevant market information to you in rapid fire fashion so that when it comes to making a decision, because you're as well informed as we are in a short space of time, you'll make the same decisions that we will. And this gives property sellers confidence in you as a professional. Look at this one. How much should an agent cost? That's a tricky question, but look at it this way. You don't pay an agent, we literally earn the fee. You don't pay an agent till they get you the price you want, and that covers their fee. When you boil it down, a great agent should cost you nothing because you'll end up with more in your pocket. Think about this. The better the agent, the more they get, the less they cost. When it comes to evaluating real estate agents, you owe it to yourself to talk to a few agents and agencies to get a feel for their skills. You should even look into some of the newer sales models and find out exactly what they offer and check out the do-it-yourself options. Go to some open homes and audition the agents. See, we're openly inviting them. Check out the open home. Be aware of what's going on there. So if your welcome homes are superior, if you've set them up better than your competition, this is going to be a standout to any prospective seller. Have a look at your competition and ours. We're essentially suggesting setting up a business partnership so the fit has to be right for you. And then get in touch with us. And that's a link in the electronic version where they can contact you, or in a second, as you'll soon see, they could either then move to setting an appointment, a listing appointment from this document. Well, not just tell you, but prove to you that your property is worth more with us. We'll start moving you from the first contact, and we won't stop until the boxes are in the truck. So we're telling them to run those comparisons. We're openly inviting them to do so, but we're pointing out the issues that they need to focus upon, because we are moving into the space as an educator rather than just a presenter. And there's the links that you can see that would then be available to them. So can you see how bloody important this is to getting the point across? I can tell you now, as this market condition changes, as we start to see the change in the marketplace, it's those agents that take the time and invest in people rather than getting frustrated, get fascinated, and move into that space where you openly say, hang on, these people don't know what they don't know yet, and take the time to educate them, and you will soon see that you will be winning listings by invitation rather than solicitation. I hope this helps. I look forward to seeing you next week. Next week, I hope to second, I know he's on here listening right now, to get Nick Saparovich on to talk about how over the years he's gone up, down, and in between, and how he's wrestling control of his productivity to get he and his team to the optimum level with his newfound brand and the agency, and how they're doing it as real estate rock stars and peak performance professionals. My name's Mark Dwyer. You can contact me, Mark with a K, at realestaterockstar.com.au, or you can telephone me on +61 410 592 165. I'd love to talk to you if you want to get on board. If you do have an assistant in tow and you want to get them into the PCC3M program, or if you're interested in jumping on board and moving into the space of sales trainer mentor. Thanks for your time, and I'll catch you next week on Real Estate Rock and Roller.